move on here to our next hand. And this is going to be interesting because three players are going to have pretty strong hands here. Now, you're going to see Kyle from seat number 2, who is a pretty good player from what I've seen at this level. And he's going to have Queen Jack of Hearts. We're also going to see Anthony in the button with Ace Queen. And we are going to see another player with Ace King. That's Peter out of seat 6. You can see the effective stack sizes. So Peter's going to make an open here to 40. Anthony here on the button is going to call. So this, the preflop raiser starts with 1400, makes it 40. Anthony's going to call. That's also going to bring in Kyle here. And this is sometimes a decent spot here to 3-bet squeeze. People know that I love Queen Jack suited for playability purposes. It really depends on how light Peter is opening. He seems like a little bit of an older guy, and sometimes you might get through him. As you can see, everybody hits a piece of this flop here. It's Ace King, Ace Jack for Rainbow. And really, really strangely, again, I don't understand what kind of wacky pot control line here is going on in this game. Peter, the preflop raiser, checks. He checks the flop with Ace King, and kind of more incredibly, Anthony checks. Now, not only am I not going to check Ace King here if I'm Peter, I'm certainly not going to check Ace Queen if I'm Anthony. Because I usually would assume that seat 6 is the preflop raiser, is going to bet Ace King. He's going to bet Ace Jack. So we can bet kind of small, maybe half pot, something like that. I don't think Kyle's going to get too out of line with some sort of check raise. People don't usually make types of crazy bluffs on ace high boards. I mean, if Kyle were to check raise, he would be representing a pretty thin value range, and that's assuming that he would 3-bet with pocket jacks, pre-flop, pocket aces. Like, he might only be repping ace jack, pocket fours, and some decent players understand what they're representing. I just don't expect him to make a move all that much, and I think he would have gotten a call from worse, some of the time too, in the forms of kings or something like that if you're Anthony. So, maybe if I had flat called with like ace deuce or ace 3 if I'm Anthony on the button, I possibly check that back to get future value. But with a hand as strong as ace queen, I'm going to bet the flop, as I'm going to bet the flop if I'm Peter. Now, the turn rolls off a queen, which is like a super duper action card here, right, on the turn. Anthony here makes aces and queens. Kyle makes queens and jacks. Peter picks up a gut shot straight draw, and there are backdoor spades. So the pot is $125 here, and Kyle is going to come out now and bet, which I think is totally fine. I think I absolutely would come out and bet now that I turn 2-pair. He bets 75. Peter calls, and it's like, if you're Kyle and when Peter calls, what kind of hands do you think he might have? He might have like a king queen, again, pocket kings, something like that. There's a possibility that he might have like ace 10 that he checked or some sort of ace that he checked. I wouldn't have thought his hand was as strong as ace king. But I don't really think he has 2-pair here, or he was slow playing a set all that much. Now, for Anthony, it's really, really interesting though, because when you're playing against a good player in Kyle, and I know that Kyle is a good player, I very, very likely may just call here with ace queen and not overplay my hand. I may raise because Peter's in there in the middle, because if I raise and Kyle comes back over the top, I think that Kyle, he's basically playing his hand the way that he has to, and ace queen's probably not going to be good, but you're almost never going to see a bet 3-bet here from out of position that is basically not the nuts. I don't think. If a weaker player comes out and bets out of the big blind and I'm in Anthony's spot and I happen to check back ace queen, I'm going to certainly raise the turn. Certainly raise the turn when Peter just calls in between. And then we can get our turn value and then evaluate what comes on the river if it goes call, call. But this is occasionally like one of these spots where, you've got a good player leading out whose hand is entirely in the dark because it gets checked through on the flop. You've turned 2-pair, but you do lose to certain things like a set of fours or king 10. So the better the player, the more frequency I might just be flatting here as an over flat. And that's what Anthony does. I don't think it's a terrible play. Um, but against typical competition, typical recreational competition, typical competition that I just, don't think is that good, with the preflop razor calling in between there, I would probably bump it up to like 225. Something like that. And you're just never really going to get bet 3-bet, um, except if somebody has king 10. They're not even going to bet 3-bet with pocket fours the way that the hand goes down all that much. Maybe if they're a little bit short, because you can have king 10. So we roll off here to the river, as Anthony did just overcall. And the river here is the jack of spades, which is quite interesting here because of the fact that backdoor spades have now come out. Now, if you look at this from Kyle's perspective, remember, it got checked around on the flop. He bet the turn and two people called. From Kyle's perspective, he doesn't know what anybody has. There is a fairly good chance. There's a chance. Maybe I guess I would say like maybe a substantial chance, maybe not a very high chance or a high frequency that someone has a flush, but it's probably in the middle here, given this action of bet, turn, call, call. Now the river rolls off the flush card. So the question here is that, if you're Kyle, you basically have the nuts. I really think so, in the form of, like, the only thing that you are ever scared of here, or that you ever really lose to, is pocket aces. I don't, for the reasons that we talked about on the turn. This is talking about hand reading and going back from street to street. I just don't see that that's really possible from Peter's perspective here. You would have to check aces and just call turn. So you have the nuts, in essence. I mean, you lose to pocket queens. Again, it's unlikely. There's only one combination of pocket queens because we have a queen in our hand. It's more likely that somebody backed into a flush here, or somebody has an ace, or somebody has a hand like king queen. And this kind of all goes back to the crux of your competition in live poker. I understand what Kyle was trying to do here because he's going to take a long time in check. He's obviously going to be going for a check raise for value here, on the river against a flush. The problem here is that I just think that, it's easier for us to see because we can see the cards. I don't know how often people are betting medium strength hands. Usually I like to go for a plan of betting kind of smaller from up front with nuttish hands when people haven't really shown a lot of strength to get called, because people just check back so often. Now, Anthony probably isn't going to check back a flush if he backed into like 7-8 of spades. But the problem is that, if Anthony, say, were to bet, if he did back into a flush and then you check raise, is he going to call? Now, there are certainly a lot of recreational players that are not capable of folding, so it is the way to get, a fair amount of value. But then there's a lot of recreational players, or players that are playing just for fun, that don't bet the river with hands that they should bet, specifically because they're incapable of folding to a raise. So the way that they patch that leak up is they check back really strong hands to not opening the betting up. So you play this game with yourself sometimes on the river from up front with kind of a nuttish type of hand where it's like, well, somebody should have a flush here, I'm going to check raise. And you can see that like both players check back substantially strong hands here. And I think at least one would probably have called the bet. It kind of sucks for Kyle, the fact that the jack was a spade and everyone's kind of scared. But I'm really surprised, at least if I'm in Anthony's spot, to check that back. Because, when you just call the turn here, you don't raise the turn, you just call the turn, and the river rolls off a jack, and now Kyle checks and Peter checks, you're almost always going to have the best hand here. I really feel that's true. Now, obviously, he didn't have the best hand, and I probably would have bet something like 150, 175. Kyle would have raised me, and it was an easy fold. But I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, the way that this hand went down in Anthony's spot, ace queen's the best hand, and you cannot be scared of monsters under the bed when it comes to value betting here, on the river. Now, again, we can see the cards, don't want to be results oriented, but I think that that is certainly a bet here with ace queen at the end. I think it's some lost value. He ends up looking good because he didn't have the best hand, but it's a little bit surprising to play that hand so passively. This was kind of missed value all around. I understand what Kyle was trying to do at the end. It didn't really work, but checking ace king, checking ace queen, um, pretty pretty non-value oriented.